The stagecoach rattled into the dusty town of Sage Creek, Arizona Territory, on a scorching July afternoon in 1882, and Eleanor Hartwell pressed her face against the window, wondering if this God-forsaken place would be her salvation or her final prison. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with nothing but a carpetbag, $23 sewn into her petticoat, and a fresh scar on her soul that no amount of desert sun could heal. Her husband's words still echoed in her mind like a death knell, words spoken with such casual cruelty that they had shattered whatever remained of her already fragile spirit. Eleanor was 24 years old, though she felt ancient, worn down by 5 years of marriage to Richard Hartwell, a banker who had courted her with pretty words and promises before revealing his true nature the moment the wedding vows were spoken. She had been plain even as a girl, she knew that much. With mousy brown hair that refused to hold a curl, gray eyes that seemed perpetually tired, and a frame too thin for the fashionable silhouettes of the day. But Richard had made her believe that her education, her quick mind, and her gentle heart were enough. He had lied. The stagecoach jerked to a halt outside the Wells Fargo office, and Eleanor gathered her belongings with shaking hands. The other passengers, a mining engineer and a woman who claimed to be a school teacher, disembarked quickly, eager to escape the suffocating heat. Eleanor climbed down carefully, her legs unsteady after so many hours of travel, and looked around at what would be her new home. Sage Creek was typical of Arizona Territory towns, a collection of wooden and adobe buildings clustered along a main street that turned to mud in the rainy season and dust the rest of the year. False-fronted stores advertised dry goods, hardware, and liquor. The saloon dominated one corner, its painted sign promising entertainment and refreshment. Cowboys lounged on the wooden sidewalks, their spurs jingling softly. Somewhere a dog barked, and the smell of horses and humanity hung thick in the air. Eleanor had come to Sage Creek because her Aunt Martha lived here, running a boarding house for respectable women. It was her only refuge, the only place she could think to go when she finally found the courage to leave Richard. The final straw had come 2 months ago, when she had dared to ask him why he no longer touched her, why he flinched when she entered a room, why he seemed to hate the very sight of her. His answer had been delivered with cold precision, each word a knife to her heart. "You are too ugly to love, Eleanor. I thought I could overlook your appearance, but I cannot. The sight of you disgusts me. I only married you for your father's connections, and now that he is dead, you are of no use to me whatsoever." She had stood there, frozen, as he continued, "I will not divorce you, as that would create scandal, but do not expect me to play the devoted husband. Find somewhere else to live. I care not where." Eleanor had packed that very night, waiting until Richard was asleep in his separate bedroom. She had taken only what was hers, leaving behind the jewelry he had given her, the expensive dresses he had purchased to make her presentable. She wanted nothing that would tie her to him, nothing that would remind her of the woman she had tried so desperately to become for his sake. Now, standing in the Arizona heat, Eleanor felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had no way of knowing if her aunt would welcome her, if there was even room at the boarding house, if she could make a life here in this harsh, unforgiving landscape. But anything was better than staying with Richard, better than living with a man who looked at her with such contempt. She asked a passing gentleman for directions to Martha Brennan's boarding house and was pointed toward a 2-story structure at the end of the main street, painted white with green shutters. Eleanor picked up her carpetbag and began walking, very aware of the stares from the townspeople. New arrivals were always a source of curiosity in small towns, and a woman traveling alone was particularly noteworthy. The boarding house was well maintained, with a small garden in front where roses struggled valiantly against the desert climate. Eleanor climbed the steps to the front porch and knocked on the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She looked Eleanor up and down, taking in the travel-stained dress, the pale face, the desperate hope in her niece's eyes. "Eleanor," Martha said, her voice giving nothing away, "I received your telegram. Come in." Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. She followed her aunt inside into a cool, dim hallway that smelled of lavender and beeswax. The boarding house was clean and orderly, with good furniture and lace curtains at the windows. Martha led her to a small parlor and gestured for her to sit. "Tell me everything," Martha commanded, settling into a chair across from Eleanor, "and do not spare the details. I need to know what I'm dealing with," Eleanor told her. She had never been good at hiding her feelings, and the words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She told her aunt about Richard's cruelty, his cold indifference, his final devastating pronouncement. She told her about the loneliness of her marriage, the way she had tried so hard to be a good wife, to manage his household perfectly, to never give him cause for complaint. And she told her about the moment she had realized that nothing she did would ever be enough, because the problem was not her behavior, but her face. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each revelation. When Eleanor finally fell silent, exhausted and embarrassed by her own emotional display, her aunt reached over and took her hand. "That man is a fool," Martha said firmly, "and a cruel one at that. You are welcome here, Eleanor, for as long as you need. I have a small room on the second floor that you can have. It is not large, but it is clean and private. You can help me with the boarding house in exchange for room and board, and perhaps in time you can find other work if you wish." Eleanor felt tears pricking at her eyes, the first genuine tears of relief she had shed in months. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what I would have done if you had turned me away." "Family does not turn family away," Martha said briskly, though her eyes were kind. "Now let me show you to your room. You look as though you were about to collapse." The room was indeed small, but it had a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the back garden. To Eleanor, it was paradise. She unpacked her few belongings while Martha went to prepare some supper, and for the first time in years she felt something that might have been peace. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor threw herself into helping Martha run the boarding house, grateful for the physical labor that left her too exhausted to think. She cleaned rooms, changed linens, helped with the cooking, and tended the garden. Martha's other boarders were all women, most of them working as seamstresses, laundresses, or shop assistants. They were kind to Eleanor, though curious about her past, and she gradually began to feel as though she might build a life here. But Richard's words still haunted her. She found herself avoiding mirrors, flinching when people looked at her too closely, wondering if they saw what he had seen. Was she truly so ugly? Had her mother lied when she said Eleanor had a sweet face? Had her father been blind to her defects? The questions circled in her mind like vultures, picking at what little remained of her self-worth. It was on a Saturday morning in late August that everything changed. Eleanor had been sent to the mercantile to purchase supplies, and she was examining a bolt of fabric when she heard raised voices outside. She glanced through the window and saw a crowd gathering in the street, their attention focused on something she could not quite see. Curiosity overcame her natural reticence, and she finished her purchase quickly before stepping outside to see what the commotion was about. The crowd had formed a loose circle around two men, one of whom was on the ground clearly injured. The other man stood over him, and Eleanor caught her breath at the sight of him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who made his living with physical labor. He wore the typical outfit of a working cowboy: leather chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a vest, and a hat pushed back on his head to reveal sun-darkened skin and dark hair. But it was his face that captured Eleanor's attention. A strong, angular face with a square jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to pierce right through her. "I am telling you, I saw what happened," the cowboy was saying, his voice deep and carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "This man was trying to force himself on that girl, and she had every right to defend herself. Eleanor followed his gesture and saw a young woman, barely more than a girl really, standing behind the cowboy with tears streaming down her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and there were angry red marks on her arms where someone had grabbed her. The man on the ground, a rough-looking character with a thick beard and mean eyes, was clutching his jaw and glaring up at the cowboy. "You broke my damn jaw, Walker," he snarled. "I will see you hanged for this." "You will not," the cowboy, Walker apparently, said calmly, "because you know as well as I do that Sheriff Morrison does not take kindly to men who assault women. You are lucky all I did was break your jaw instead of shooting you." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Eleanor realized that the cowboy must be well respected in this town for them to take his side so readily. The injured man seemed to realize he was defeated because he struggled to his feet and stumbled away, still clutching his jaw and muttering curses. The cowboy turned his attention to the young woman, his entire demeanor softening. "Are you all right, Miss Jenny?" he asked gently. "Did he hurt you badly?" The girl shook her head, still crying. "No, sir, Mr. Walker, you got there before he could do anything worse. I was just so scared." "You go on home now," Walker said, "and you tell your pa what happened. He should know there are men in this town who need watching." Jenny nodded and hurried away, and the crowd began to disperse, satisfied that the excitement was over. Eleanor found herself still standing there, watching as the cowboy adjusted his hat and brushed the dust from his clothes. He must have felt her gaze because he suddenly looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment neither of them moved. Eleanor felt a strange sensation in her chest, as though something inside her had shifted and rearranged itself. The cowboy's blue eyes widened slightly, and then he was walking toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat politely, "I hope the commotion did not frighten you too badly." Eleanor found her voice, though it came out softer than she intended. "Not at all. I think what you did was very brave." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I do not know about brave, just doing what any decent man would do. I am Jacob Walker, by the way. Most folks just call me Jake." "Eleanor Hartwell," she replied, and then because she could not seem to stop herself. "Though I suppose I should say Eleanor Brennan. That is my maiden name. I am staying with my Aunt Martha at her boarding house." She did not know why she had volunteered that information, why she had felt the need to distance herself from Richard's name, but Jake did not seem to find it strange. He simply nodded, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow did not. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Eleanor," he said. "I hope you are finding Sage Creek to your liking." "I am," Eleanor said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. Despite everything, despite her broken heart and shattered confidence, she was beginning to feel at home here. They talked for a few more minutes, awkward small talk about the weather and the town, before Jake tipped his hat again and took his leave. Eleanor watched him go, feeling confused and unsettled. She could not remember the last time a man had looked at her the way Jake Walker had, as though she were actually worth looking at, worth talking to. It had to be her imagination, she told herself. He was just being polite, the way any gentleman would be. But as the days passed, Eleanor found herself thinking about Jake Walker more often than she should. She learned from her aunt's boarders that he worked at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside of town as a horsebreaker and general ranch hand. He was 27 years old, unmarried, and had a reputation as an honest, hard-working man who kept his word. He came into town most Saturdays for supplies and to visit the saloon, though he was not known as a heavy drinker or a troublemaker. Eleanor told herself she was only curious, that it meant nothing. But she could not deny the flutter in her chest every Saturday when she hoped she might catch a glimpse of him on the street. It was 3 weeks after their first meeting that Jake Walker came to Martha's boarding house. Eleanor was in the garden weeding the roses when she heard the knock on the front door. She thought nothing of it until Martha called her name, her voice carrying through the open window. Eleanor wiped the dirt from her hands and went inside, stopping short when she saw Jake standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. Mr. Walker is here to see you, Martha said, her eyebrows raised in a way that suggested she would be demanding explanations later. To see me? Eleanor repeated, confused. Why? Jake shifted his weight, a faint flush creeping up his neck. I was wondering, Miss Eleanor, if you might care to accompany me to the church social on Sunday. They are having a box supper, and I thought you might enjoy it. Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. A box supper was a courting ritual, where unmarried women prepared meals in decorated boxes and unmarried men bid on them, the winner getting to share the meal with the woman who prepared it. It was not something a woman like her was ever invited to participate in. I do not understand, she said slowly. Why are you asking me? Jake looked genuinely puzzled by her confusion. Because I would like to spend time with you, he said simply. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since we met, and I would very much like to get to know you better. Eleanor felt her face flush hot, and a familiar panic began to rise in her chest. This had to be some kind of cruel joke, some kind of trick. Men did not ask her to socials. Men did not want to spend time with her. Richard had made that abundantly clear. I cannot, she said, her voice coming out harsher than she intended. Thank you for the invitation, but I must decline. She turned and fled before Jake could respond, running up the stairs to her room and closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart racing, feeling foolish and frightened and angry all at once. How dare he? How dare he come here and offer her hope, only to snatch it away when he realized what everyone else already knew? There was a soft knock on her door a few minutes later, and Martha's voice called, Eleanor, may I come in? Eleanor opened the door and let her aunt enter, then sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Martha joined her, her expression thoughtful. That young man seemed very disappointed, Martha observed. He is quite taken with you, I think. He cannot be, Eleanor said flatly. He does not know me. If he did, he would realize that I am not the sort of woman men want to be seen with. Martha was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Eleanor, I do not know what that husband of yours did to you, but he has convinced you of a lie. You are not ugly. You are not unlovable. You are a kind, intelligent, hard-working young woman, and any man would be lucky to have you. Richard said I was too ugly to love, Eleanor whispered, the words tearing at her throat. He said the sight of me disgusted him. Why would he say that if it were not true? Because he is a small, cruel man who wanted to hurt you, Martha said, her voice sharp with anger. Because there is something broken inside him that made him need to break you too. But Eleanor, you cannot let his poison destroy the rest of your life. If you turn away every kindness, every possibility of happiness, because you believe his lies, then he is won. Is that what you want? Eleanor did not answer because she did not know. She wanted to believe her aunt, wanted to believe that Jake Walker's interest was genuine, that she might be worthy of affection after all, but the fear was too great, the wounds too fresh. What if she let herself hope, and he rejected her? What if he realized, as Richard had, that she was not worth loving? Martha patted her hand and stood. Think about it, she said. That is all I ask. Mr. Walker said he would return tomorrow for your answer. You have until then to decide whether you want to live in fear or take a chance on something better. After her aunt left, Eleanor sat alone in her room, staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. It was beautiful, she realized, this harsh desert landscape. It was nothing like St. Louis, with its cultured society and manicured gardens, but there was a raw honesty to it, a sense that things here were stripped down to their essentials. You either survived or you did not. You either fought for what you wanted or you gave up. Eleanor had given up so much already. She had given up on her marriage, on her dreams of having children, on the idea that she might ever be cherished by someone. But sitting here now, in this small room in this dusty town, she wondered if perhaps she had been fighting the wrong battle all along. Perhaps the question was not whether she was lovable, but whether she was brave enough to let someone try to love her. The next morning, when Jake Walker returned to the boarding house, Eleanor was waiting for him in the parlor. She had put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the gray of her eyes, and she had taken extra care with her hair. It still would not hold a curl, but she had pinned it up neatly and tucked a small flower behind her ear. Jake's face lit up when he saw her, and Eleanor felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. "Miss Eleanor," he said, his voice full of hope, "have you reconsidered?" Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. "Yes," she said, "I would be honored to accompany you to the church social, Mr. Walker." The smile he gave her was bright enough to rival the Arizona sun, and for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that perhaps she was not as broken as she thought. The church social was held in a meadow just outside of town, where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade and a small creek burbled over smooth stones. By the time Eleanor and Jake arrived, the area was already crowded with families spreading blankets, children running and playing, and young couples strolling arm in arm. Eleanor clutched her decorated box, which contained fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and an apple pie, feeling her nervousness return in full force. She was acutely aware of the stares from the other townspeople, the whispered conversations behind hands. She knew what they were thinking. What was a man like Jake Walker, handsome and respected, doing with a woman like her? But Jake seemed oblivious to the attention, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he guided her towards the area where the boxes were being displayed. "I am certain yours will be the finest one here," he said, and Eleanor wanted to believe him. The bidding began shortly after noon, with the preacher's wife acting as auctioneer. One by one, the decorated boxes were held up, and the men called out their bids. Eleanor watched nervously as the boxes before hers were sold, most going for between $2 and $5. When her box was finally lifted, her heart began to hammer. "Now here is a pretty one," the preacher's wife said, examining Eleanor's box with its blue ribbon and pressed flowers. "Who will start the bidding at $1? $5, Jake called out immediately, and a ripple of surprise went through the crowd. That was an unusually high opening bid. There was a moment of silence, and then another voice called $6. Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized the voice. It belonged to Thomas Garrett, a wealthy rancher's son who had a reputation as a womanizer. Jake's jaw tightened. $10. The crowd gasped. $10 was more than most working men made in a week. Thomas Garrett looked angry, but he was not willing to go higher. "Sold to Mr. Walker for $10, the preacher's wife announced, and scattered applause followed. Jake paid his money and collected the box, then led Eleanor to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree. They spread out a blanket, and Eleanor began unpacking the food with trembling hands. She could still feel people staring, could still hear the whispered conversations. What was wrong with her that she could not simply enjoy this moment? "Eleanor," Jake said softly, and she looked up to find him watching her with concern. "What is wrong? If you are uncomfortable, we can leave." "No," Eleanor said quickly. "I'm sorry. I'm just not accustomed to this." "Accustomed to what?" She gestured helplessly at the blanket, the food, him. "Any of this. Being courted, having someone want to spend time with me. I'm afraid I'm not very good at it." Jake was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Then he said very gently, "Your husband was the one who told you that you were ugly, was he not?" Eleanor froze, her hands stilling on the food. She had not expected him to be so direct, and she did not know how to respond. After a long moment, she nodded. "He said I was too ugly to love," she whispered, the words still painful even now. "He said the sight of me disgusted him." Jake's expression darkened with anger, but his voice remained gentle when he spoke. "Then he was blind." Eleanor looked at him sharply, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Your husband was blind," Jake repeated, his blue eyes locked on hers. "Because you are not ugly, Eleanor. You are beautiful. You have the kindest eyes I have ever seen, and the sweetest smile and a grace about you that makes my heart ache. Your husband was either blind or a fool, and likely both." Eleanor felt tears welling up in her eyes, hot and stinging. "You do not have to say such things." "I am not saying them because I have to," Jake said. "I am saying them because they are true, and I will keep saying them until you believe them." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, feeling something inside her begin to crack and crumble, all the walls she had built around her heart starting to give way. "I do not know if I can believe them," she admitted. "He spent 5 years convincing me that I was worthless. That is not something I can forget in a day." "I know," Jake said, "but I am a patient man, Eleanor. I will wait as long as it takes." They ate their meal in comfortable silence after that, and Eleanor found herself beginning to relax. Jake told her stories about working at the Double R Ranch, about the horses he had trained, and the places he had traveled before settling in Sage Creek. He had been born in Texas, he told her, and had worked on ranches since he was 14. He had come to Arizona Territory 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of good land and honest work. "What about you?" he asked. "What brought you to Sage Creek?" Eleanor told him, haltingly at first, and then with growing confidence about her marriage to Richard, about the years of trying to be good enough, about the final devastating conversation that had sent her fleeing to her aunt. Jake listened without interrupting, his hand still holding hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I am glad you left him," he said when she finished. "A man who would treat a woman that way does not deserve to call himself a husband." "The law says I am still his wife," Eleanor pointed out. "I did not divorce him. I just ran away." "Then maybe you should divorce him," Jake said. "Get yourself free properly so you can start fresh." Eleanor had considered it, but the idea terrified her. Divorce was scandalous, especially for a woman. It would mark her as ruined, unsuitable for respectable society. But then again, she was already in Arizona Territory, far from St. Louis and its rigid social codes. Perhaps here, in this wild, honest place, she could make her own rules. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur. They walked by the creek, talked about everything and nothing, and Eleanor found herself laughing for the first time in longer than she could remember. Jake had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. By the time he walked her back to the boarding house that evening, Eleanor's cheeks hurt from smiling. "May I call on you again?" Jake asked as they stood on the front porch, the last light of day fading from the sky. "Yes," Eleanor said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice. "I would like that very much." Jake grinned and tipped his hat, and Eleanor went inside feeling lighter than she had in years. Martha was waiting in the parlor, a knowing smile on her face, and Eleanor found herself telling her aunt everything about the social, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I told you," Martha said when Eleanor finally ran out of breath. "That young man is smitten with you." "I think I might be smitten with him too," Eleanor admitted, and felt a thrill of fear and excitement at the confession. Over the next few weeks, Jake became a regular visitor at the boarding house. He came by several times a week after finishing his work at the ranch, always bringing small gifts, a handful of wildflowers, a pretty stone he had found, a book he thought she might enjoy. They took walks through town, sat on the porch in the evenings, and talked about their hopes and dreams and fears. Eleanor learned that Jake wanted to own his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise horses and maybe some cattle. He had been saving his wages for years, putting aside every penny he could spare, and he figured in another 2 or 3 years he would have enough for a down payment on some land. He wanted a simple life, he told her, with good work, good land, and maybe someday a good woman to share it with. He learned that Eleanor had always loved reading, that she had been educated at a fine school in St. Louis, and had dreamed of becoming a teacher before her father had insisted she marry Richard. She told him about the books she loved, the poems she had memorized, the essays she had written that her teachers had praised. She had given up on those dreams when she married, believing that being a good wife would be enough. Now she was not sure what she wanted, only that it was something different from the life she had left behind. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor felt herself falling in love with Jake Walker. It was nothing like what she had felt for Richard, that nervous, desperate need to please. This was something deeper, something that grew slowly and steadily like a plant putting down roots. She loved the way Jake listened when she talked, really listened, as though her words mattered. She loved his quiet strength, the way he was gentle with her but fierce in defense of those he cared about. She loved the way he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. But with love came fear. What if this was all a dream and she would wake up to find it gone? What if Jake realized, as Richard had, that she was not worth the effort? What if she was too damaged, too broken, to ever be the kind of woman a good man deserved? The crisis came in early November when Jake invited Eleanor to attend a barn dance at the Double R Ranch. It was a big event, with everyone from the surrounding ranches and farms invited, and Eleanor knew it would be a very public declaration of their relationship. She wanted to go, wanted to stand beside Jake and let the world see that they were together. But the old fears rose up, whispering that she would embarrass him, that people would wonder what he saw in her. She was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, trying to work up the courage to tell Jake she would go, when she saw a familiar figure riding down the street. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Richard Hartwell, sitting tall and arrogant on a fine bay horse, looking around Sage Creek with obvious disdain. Eleanor stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair, panic clawing at her throat. What was Richard doing here? How had he found her? She started to retreat into the house, but it was too late. Richard had seen her, and he was spurring his horse forward, his face set in grim lines. He dismounted in front of the boarding house and tied his horse to the rail, then climbed the steps to the porch. Eleanor backed away, her heart hammering, but there was nowhere to go. "Eleanor," Richard said coldly, "I have been searching for you for 3 months. Did you really think you could run away from me?" "I am not coming back," Eleanor said, forcing the words out through a tight throat. "Our marriage is over, Richard." "Our marriage is over when I say it is over," Richard snapped. "You are my wife, Eleanor, whether you like it or not, and you will return to St. Louis with me immediately." "No," Eleanor said, and the word came out stronger than she expected. "No, Richard, I will not go back to a man who despises me. I would rather die." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You think you have a choice? You have no money, no prospects, no future without me. What are you going to do? Live here as a charity case for the rest of your life? Come back to St. Louis, and I will at least give you a roof over your head." "I do not want your roof or your charity," Eleanor said. "I want nothing from you except to be left alone." "That is not going to happen," Richard said, and he stepped forward, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "You are coming with me, Eleanor, even if I have to drag you." "Let her go." The voice was low and dangerous, and both Eleanor and Richard turned to see Jake Walker standing at the bottom of the porch steps. He must have been coming to visit, and Eleanor had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. "This is none of your concern," Richard said, not releasing Eleanor's arm. "This is between me and my wife." "Your wife just told you she is not going with you," Jake said, climbing the steps with a deliberate slowness that was somehow more threatening than any display of anger could have been. "That makes it my concern. Now let her go before I make you let her go." Richard looked Jake up and down, taking in the worn work clothes, the gun belt strapped low on his hips, the cold fury in his blue eyes. Eleanor saw calculation cross her husband's face as he weighed his options. "This is ridiculous," Richard said, but he released Eleanor's arm. "Eleanor, be reasonable. You cannot survive out here on your own. You need me." "She does not need you," Jake said flatly. "She does not need anything from you. So you can get back on your horse and ride out of here, or I can help you get on your horse. Your choice." Richard's face went red with rage and humiliation. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? She is my wife." "No," Eleanor said, and her voice was steady now, all the fear burned away by anger. "I am not your wife, Richard. Not in any way that matters. You made it very clear that you wanted nothing to do with me, so I am giving you what you wanted. I am leaving you alone, and you are going to leave me alone. Do you understand?" Richard looked as though he wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's face must have convinced him he was fighting a losing battle. He glanced at Jake, who stood with his hand resting casually on the butt of his gun, and then back at Eleanor. "You will regret this," Richard said. "You will come crawling back to me eventually, and when you do, I will not take you." "I will not come back," Eleanor said. "Goodbye, Richard." Richard stood there for another moment, as though waiting for her to change her mind. When she did not, he turned on his heel and stalked down the steps, yanking his horse's reins free and mounting with more force than necessary. He rode off down the street without looking back, and Eleanor watched him go, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Jake waited until Richard was out of sight, then turned to Eleanor with concern written all over his face. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Eleanor said, looking down at her arm where Richard's fingers had left red marks. "Or rather, yes, but nothing that will not heal. Thank you for being here, Jake. I do not know what I would have done if you had not arrived when you did." "I will always be here when you need me," Jake said, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Eleanor let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his solid warmth, feeling her racing heart begin to slow. They stood like that for a long time, and then Jake pulled back just enough to look down at her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice serious, "I know this might not be the best time, and I know we have not been courting for very long, but I need you to know something. I love you. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die. And if you will have me, I would like to marry you. Not because you need protection from your husband, but because I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else." Eleanor stared up at him, her mind reeling. Marriage. He wanted to marry her. After everything Richard had said, everything he had made her believe about herself, Jake Walker wanted to make her his wife. "I am still married to Richard," she said, the practical part of her brain trying to assert itself. "I cannot marry you while I am still legally his wife." "Then we will get you a divorce," Jake said. "I know a lawyer in Tucson who can handle it. It might take a few months, but we can wait. I told you, Eleanor, I am a patient man." "Why?" Eleanor whispered. "Why do you want to marry me? I am not beautiful. I am not charming. I have nothing to offer you." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes burning with intensity. "You have everything to offer me," he said fiercely. "You are kind and intelligent and brave. You have a strength in you that amazes me, Eleanor. You survived 5 years with a man who tried to break you, and you are still here, still fighting, still hoping. That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And when I look at you, all I see is the woman I want to spend the rest of my life loving." Eleanor felt the tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. For the first time in so long, she let herself believe that perhaps she was worthy of love after all. Perhaps Richard had been wrong, and Jake was right. Perhaps she was not too ugly to love. Perhaps she had just been loved by the wrong man. "Yes," she said, the word coming out on a sob. "Yes, Jake, I will marry you. As soon as I am free, I will marry you." Jake kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that felt like a promise and a benediction all at once. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor was smiling through her tears, and Jake was grinning like he had just won the greatest prize in the world. The next few months were a flurry of activity. Jake hired a lawyer in Tucson to handle the divorce proceedings, and Eleanor provided testimony about Richard's abandonment and cruelty. Arizona Territory had more progressive divorce laws than many states, and the judge who heard the case was sympathetic to Eleanor's situation. By late February of 1883, the divorce was finalized and Eleanor was legally free. Jake had been saving for his own ranch, but he used a good portion of those savings to purchase a small homestead just outside of Sage Creek. It was not much, Just 80 acres with a modest house, a barn, and a creek running through the property, but it was theirs. He spent every spare moment fixing up the house, replacing broken windows, patching the roof, painting the walls a cheerful yellow that made Eleanor smile. They were married on a bright March morning, with Martha and the other boarding house women in attendance, along with Jake's friends from the Double R Ranch. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town, and Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and when Jake saw her walking down the aisle, the look of pure joy on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Jake kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. They celebrated with a small reception in the church hall, with food and music and dancing, and Eleanor found herself surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, who were happy for her. It was nothing like the cold, formal wedding she had endured with Richard, where every moment had felt like a performance. This was real, warm, full of love and laughter. When the celebration finally ended, Jake lifted Eleanor onto his horse and they rode out to their new home together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and Eleanor leaned back against Jake's chest, feeling utterly content. "I love you, Mrs. Walker," Jake murmured against her hair. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their first months of marriage were not without challenges. The homestead required constant work, and there were days when Eleanor wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. Jake worked from dawn to dusk, breaking horses for neighboring ranches to bring in extra money, while also trying to build up their own small herd. Eleanor kept house, tended a garden, raised chickens, and helped Jake with the horses whenever an extra pair of hands was needed. But despite the hard work, Eleanor had never been happier. She loved waking up beside Jake, loved the way he would pull her close in the early morning darkness and kiss her softly before rising to start his day. She loved the evenings when they would sit on the porch together, watching the sunset and talking about their plans for the future. She loved the way he looked at her, with admiration and desire and a tenderness that never failed to make her feel cherished. Jake kept his promise to remind her daily that she was beautiful. He would tell her in the morning when she woke with tangled hair and sleepy eyes. He would tell her in the afternoon when she was covered in garden dirt. He would tell her at night when they lay together in the darkness, and his hands and lips would show her what his words could not. Slowly, painfully slowly, Eleanor began to believe him. The voice in her head that sounded like Richard grew quieter, replaced by Jake's voice assuring her of her worth. In July, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening after supper, nervous about how he would react. They had not discussed children, and she worried that he might not be ready for the responsibility. But when she said the words, Jake's face lit up with such pure, unfiltered joy that all her fears evaporated. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "Yes," Eleanor said, smiling. "Sometime in February, I think." Jake swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing, and then set her down gently as though she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he said, his eyes shining. "Eleanor, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was difficult at times. The Arizona summer was brutal, and Eleanor struggled with the heat and the constant nausea. But Jake was attentive and patient, bringing her cool water, making sure she rested, taking on more of the household chores so she would not overtire herself. He talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child stories and making ridiculous promises about all the things they would do together. As Eleanor's belly grew, she found herself thinking about Richard less and less. The wounds he had inflicted were healing, replaced by new memories of kindness and love. She realized that she had spent so many years believing she was unlovable because one cruel man had told her so. But Jake had shown her a different truth. She was lovable. She was worthy. She was enough, just as she was. The baby came in late February of 1884 during a cold snap that left frost on the windows. The birth was long and difficult, with Martha and the midwife from town attending to Eleanor while Jake paced outside looking like he might be sick from worry. But when Eleanor finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and loud and indignant, all the pain was forgotten. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Eleanor's arms. "A big, healthy boy." Jake burst into the room before anyone could stop him, his face pale and anxious. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "I am fine," Eleanor said, exhausted but smiling. "Come meet your son." Jake approached the bed slowly, as though afraid he might break something, and looked down at the baby in Eleanor's arms. His expression transformed, softening into something Eleanor had never seen before, a love so profound it made her want to cry. "He is perfect," Jake whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled around Jake's finger, and Jake made a choked sound. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Jacob Walker, and he became the center of their world. Jake proved to be a wonderful father, patient and gentle despite his rough exterior. He would spend hours rocking Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing off-key lullabies and telling stories. Eleanor would watch them together, her heart so full of love she thought it might overflow. As Thomas grew, so did their homestead. Jake's reputation as a skilled horsebreaker spread, and they had more work than they could handle. They were able to add to their herd, purchase more land, and make improvements to the house. Eleanor started a small business of her own, selling eggs and vegetables in town, and later began taking in sewing work. The money was not extravagant, but it was enough. More importantly, it was theirs, earned through honest work and shared dreams. When Thomas was 2 years old, Eleanor found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, as though her body remembered what to do. She gave birth to a daughter in the fall of 1886, a tiny dark-haired girl they named Martha Rose, after Eleanor's aunt and the roses that grew stubbornly in their garden. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. The children grew healthy and happy, filling the house with laughter and noise. Jake's horse business continued to thrive, and they became respected members of the Sage Creek community. Eleanor joined the church ladies' auxiliary and helped organize socials and fundraisers. She made friends, real friends who valued her for who she was, not for what she looked like or who she was married to. Years passed, marked by the small triumphs and tragedies of everyday life. They lost a promising colt to a snake bite, and Eleanor wept as Jake dug the grave. They celebrated when Thomas took his first ride on a horse, sitting in front of Jake and whooping with delight. They weathered a drought that left the creek barely trickling and rejoiced when the rains finally came. They sat on the porch on summer evenings, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. Eleanor sometimes thought about Richard, wondered what had become of him. She had heard through the grapevine that he had remarried, a wealthy widow who could provide him with the social connections he craved. She felt nothing but pity for the woman, and perhaps a distant gratitude toward Richard himself. His cruelty had driven her to Arizona, to Martha, to Jake. His rejection had been the push she needed to find her true self, to learn that she was so much more than what one small, cruel man believed. In 1890, when Eleanor was 32 and Jake was 35, they welcomed their third and final child, another son they named William. By then, Thomas was 6 and Martha Rose was 4, and both children were enchanted with their new baby brother. The house rang with the sounds of childhood, with laughter and arguments and the thundering of small feet on wooden floors. On a cool evening in late October, after the children were finally asleep, Jake and Eleanor sat together on the porch as they had done so many times before. Jake's arm was around Eleanor's shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling utterly at peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked suddenly. "Leaving your old life behind? You could have stayed in St. Louis, lived in comfort even if you were not happy. Instead, you chose this." He gestured at their modest homestead, the simple house, the barn that needed a new roof. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question seriously. Then she turned to look at her husband, this good, honest man who had shown her what real love looked like. "I have never regretted it for a single moment," she said. "That life in St. Louis was not living, Jake. It was existing, barely surviving. This is living. Hard work and calloused hands and children who track mud through the house, sitting on this porch with you, watching the sun set, knowing that I am loved, truly loved, for who I am and not what I can give. How could I ever regret that?" Jake smiled and pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know what I realized the other day?" he said. "It has been 8 years since we met. 8 years since I saw you standing outside that mercantile, looking like you expected the world to reject you. And every single day since then, I have thanked God that you gave me a chance." "I should be the one thanking God," Eleanor said. "You saved me, Jake. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Jake corrected gently. "I was just drifting before I met you, Eleanor. Working and saving and planning, but with no real purpose. You gave me something to work for, someone to build a life with. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars come out one by one. Eleanor thought about how far she had come from that broken, defeated woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Sage Creek 8 years ago. She had learned that beauty was not about features or fashion, but about the light that shone from within when someone truly loved you. She had learned that strength came not from never falling, but from standing up after you had been knocked down. She had learned that family was not just about blood, but about the people who chose to stand beside you through the hard times and the good. Most importantly, she had learned that she was worthy of love, not because she had changed or become someone different, but because she had always been worthy. Richard had been wrong, just as Jake had told her that very first day. He had been blind to her worth, but Jake had seen her clearly from the very beginning. As if reading her thoughts, Jake said softly, "You know what I see when I look at you, Eleanor?" "What?" she asked, smiling. "I see the strongest woman I know," Jake said. "I see the woman who packed up everything and traveled hundreds of miles to start over. I see the woman who stood up to her husband and refused to let him drag her back into misery. I see the mother who sits up all night when the children are sick. I see the partner who works beside me every day, never complaining even when the work is hard. I see the woman I fell in love with. And Eleanor, you are beautiful. You have always been beautiful. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget it." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. Good tears. The kind that came from overwhelming happiness. She turned in Jake's arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much, Jake Walker." "I love you too," Jake replied. "Always and forever." They sat together on the porch until the night grew cold, talking and laughing and planning for the future. They discussed expanding the horse operation, perhaps hiring a hand or two to help with the work. They talked about the children's education, about how Thomas showed a real aptitude for working with horses, and how Martha Rose was already reading above her age level. They dreamed about the grandchildren they would someday have, about growing old together on this land they had built together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Martha, Eleanor's aunt, to pneumonia in the winter of 1892, and Eleanor grieved for the woman who had given her refuge when she had nowhere else to go. But they also celebrated as their children grew into fine young people. Thomas became a skilled horseman like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch. Martha Rose went away to teacher's college, fulfilling the dream Eleanor had once had for herself, and came back to teach at the Sage Creek School. William, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for woodworking, and he began making furniture that was sought after throughout the territory. In 1898, when Eleanor was 40 and Jake was 43, Thomas married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch, and the following year they welcomed their first grandchild, a girl they named Eleanor Martha. Eleanor held her tiny namesake in her arms and wept with joy, thinking about How different her life had turned out from what she had once imagined. She was a grandmother now, surrounded by family and love, living a life richer than she had ever dreamed possible. The new century came, bringing changes to Arizona territory. Sage Creek grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community, with better roads, more businesses, and talk of statehood. But some things remained constant. Jake and Eleanor's love for each other, if anything, grew deeper with the years. They had weathered storms together, literal and figurative, and come through stronger for it. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Jake surprised Eleanor with a trip to the Grand Canyon, something she had always wanted to see but had never made time for. They left the ranch in Thomas's capable hands and set out on horseback, taking their time and enjoying the journey. When they finally stood at the rim of the canyon, looking out at the vast, impossible beauty of it, Eleanor felt Jake's hand slip into hers. 20 years, Jake said, his voice full of wonder. It does not feel like nearly enough. We have many more years ahead of us, Eleanor said confidently. I plan on growing very old with you, Jake Walker. I am counting on it, Jake replied, and kissed her there on the rim of the canyon with the wind whipping around them and the whole wild, beautiful world spread out below. They returned home to find that Martha Rose had news of her own. She had been courting the new doctor in town, a thoughtful young man from Boston, and they were planning to marry in the fall. William, now 13, announced that he wanted to apprentice with the furniture maker in Tucson, and after much discussion, Jake and Eleanor agreed to let him go, knowing that he needed to follow his own path. Life continued its steady march forward. More grandchildren came, filling the house with noise and laughter whenever they visited. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in the territory. Eleanor published several articles about frontier life in Eastern magazines, using the education she had once thought wasted to share her experiences with a wider world. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and Sage Creek celebrated with a grand festival. By then, Eleanor and Jake were in their 50s, their hair touched with gray, their bodies marked by decades of hard work. But their love was as strong as ever, a steady flame that had burned bright through all the years. They stood together at the celebration, watching their children and grandchildren dance and play, surrounded by the community they had helped build. Eleanor leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Do you remember?" Eleanor said softly. "That day you found me outside the mercantile? When I was so certain that I was not worth looking at, not worth knowing?" "I remember," Jake said. "I also remember thinking that you were the most interesting woman I had ever seen and wondering how I could get you to give me a chance." Eleanor laughed. "You were very persistent." "I had to be," Jake said. "You were determined to believe you were not worth loving. I had to work hard to convince you otherwise." "You succeeded," Eleanor said, turning to look up at him. After 30 years of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart flutter. "You showed me that I was worth loving, Jake. You showed me that I was strong and capable and beautiful, even when I could not see it myself. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." "You did the same for me," Jake said seriously. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, Eleanor. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting. You made me want to be a better man." They kissed then, gentle and sweet, while their grandchildren made gagging noises and their children smiled indulgently. After all these years, Jake and Eleanor's love was something of a legend in Sage Creek, a story that people told to prove that true love did exist, that people could overcome heartbreak and find genuine happiness. The years rolled on, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings. They lost friends to age and illness, celebrated as their grandchildren grew and started families of their own. In 1920, Thomas and his wife took over full ownership of the ranch, allowing Jake and Eleanor to finally slow down a bit. They moved into a smaller house in town, closer to the doctor and the church, but they visited the ranch often, unable to stay away from the land they had built together. Jake's health began to fail in 1923. He was 68, had lived a hard life, and his body was finally starting to give out. But his spirit remained strong, his mind sharp, and his love for Eleanor unwavering. Eleanor cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. And even as he weakened, he never stopped telling her she was beautiful. He died peacefully one morning in early spring with Eleanor holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you, Eleanor. You are the most beautiful thing I ever saw." Eleanor felt as though a part of her soul had been torn away, but she took comfort in knowing that Jake had died surrounded by love, knowing that he had lived a good, full life. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he had loved, and Eleanor visited his grave every week without fail. She lived another 7 years after Jake's death, years filled with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She continued to write, published a memoir of her life on the frontier that became a modest success, and remained active in the community, but everyone could see that part of her was simply waiting, counting the days until she could be reunited with the man who had loved her so completely. Eleanor died in her sleep in the spring of 1930 at the age of 72. Her children found her in her bed, looking peaceful, with a slight smile on her face. On her nightstand was a photograph of Jake, taken on their wedding day, and a pressed flower from the bouquet she had carried down the aisle. They buried her next to Jake, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. The preacher spoke about love and devotion, about how Eleanor and Jake had been an example to everyone who knew them. But it was Thomas who gave the eulogy that really mattered, standing at his mother's grave with tears streaming down his weathered face. "My mother came to Sage Creek a broken woman," he said. "She had been told she was ugly, unlovable, worthless. But my father saw the truth that her first husband was too blind to see. He saw her strength, her kindness, her beauty, and he spent 47 years making sure she saw it too. Their love was the kind that romance novels are written about, the kind that people dream of finding. And I hope that wherever they are now, they are together again, still making each other laugh, still looking at each other like they did on their wedding day." The townspeople murmured their agreement, and as they dispersed, many of them lingered to share their own memories of Jake and Eleanor, the couple who had overcome so much, who had built a life of love and purpose in the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, the woman who had been told she was too ugly to love, and the cowboy who had seen past the lie to the truth beneath. Their story became part of Sage Creek's history, told and retold to each new generation. The ranch they had started continued to thrive under their descendants' care, and their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the land they had claimed. The small house Jake had bought and fixed up for his bride was preserved as a historical site, and visitors could walk through the rooms and imagine the life that had been lived there. But more than buildings or land, Jake and Eleanor's legacy was the love they had shared, a love that proved that beauty was not about perfection, but about being seen and valued for who you truly were. They had shown that wounds could heal, that broken hearts could mend, that it was never too late to start over and find happiness. In the end, Richard Hartwell had been wrong about everything that mattered. Eleanor had not been too ugly to love. She had simply been loved by the wrong man until she found the right one. And Jake Walker, the cowboy with the patient heart and seeing eyes, had given her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was worthy. She was lovable. She was enough, exactly as she was. Their love story, born in the dust and heat of an Arizona summer day in 1882, endured long after they were gone, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of loving them not despite their imperfections but including them, of building a life together based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering devotion. And if you ever found yourself in Sage Creek, Arizona, and climbed the hill to the old cemetery on the edge of town, you would find 2 weathered headstones standing side by side beneath a cottonwood tree. One read, "Jacob Walker, beloved husband, father, and friend, 1855 to 1923. The other read, "Eleanor Walker, beloved wife, mother, and friend, 1858 to 1930. And carved beneath Eleanor's name were the words that had changed her life all those years ago. She was beautiful to those with eyes to see. It was a fitting epitaph for a woman who had learned that beauty was not about features or fashion, but about being loved for who you truly were, and for a love that had proven beyond any doubt that when someone told you that you were too ugly to love, they were simply revealing their own blindness, their own inability to see the truth that was right in front of them. Eleanor and Jake's story was one of redemption and healing, of finding love when you had stopped believing in it, of building a life together through hard work and unwavering commitment. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that it was never too late to start over, never too late to find happiness, never too late to be loved exactly as you were. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy two people could leave behind. The knowledge that love was not about perfection, but about finding someone who saw your worth when you had forgotten it yourself, who stood by you through the hard times and celebrated with you through the good, who made you believe finally and completely that you were enough. The story of the woman who was told she was too ugly to love and the cowboy who proved that her husband had simply been blind would be told for generations to come, a reminder that true love existed, that it could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes, in the most unexpected places and at the most unexpected times, you could find the person who would change your life forever. Their love had been tested by hardship, strengthened by adversity, and had grown deeper with every passing year. It was the kind of love that made people believe in happy endings, that made them believe that somewhere out there was someone who would see them truly and love them completely. It was the kind of love worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything. And as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold just as it had on the day Jake and Eleanor first met, their story lived on, a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of seeing people for who they truly were, and the beautiful truth that everyone, absolutely everyone, was worthy of being loved.